Steve Acton, where are you? Right, let's hear your question.
Given the rising number of civilian deaths in Gaza, is it time for the government and opposition to call for a full ceasefire? If not, what is the justification to continue as things are?
And this is obviously what a lot of people are talking about, Steve. Jeremy. So the government is not calling for a full ceasefire?
The straight answer, Steve, is no.
And what's the justification for things to continue as they are? That's Steve's question, then.
The straightforward justification. We all grieve for civilian casualties in Gaza, of course we do. But no one in this room would have forgotten the 1,400 people who were murdered in cold blood in Israel as a result of a terrorist attack. Israel has the right to defend itself. It has the right to go after the terrorists who caused that dreadful bloodshed and degrade Hamas. It has to have that right. It's got that right in international law. It's got that right under the UN Charter. Now, it needs to act proportionately, appropriately. It needs to act under international law.
And the UN is questioning now whether it's not concluding, but it's questioning whether Israel is acting in accordance with international law.
Israel had an obvious attack, which we're all aware of, on her territory, and she has responded, which is absolutely horrific, and she has responded in going after Hamas and going after the terrorists. I think it is absolutely appalling that Hamas has shielded themselves behind civilians in Gaza. That's their MO. That's how they operate. And it makes it extremely difficult. Israel must be conscious of its international legal obligations, but it does have the right to defend itself. It does have the right to go in and sort out Hamas. And if we call for a ceasefire now, if a ceasefire occurs now, you are sending exactly the wrong signal, which is that people can get away literally with murder, and that would be wrong.
Marie, I want to come to you because you have just come back from Qatar. Yeah. And as we know, Qatar, there are Hamas leaders in Qatar, and Qatar has acted as something of an interlocutor with Hamas. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, can I just say first how much I regret the loss of any innocent civilian life. I'm sure we've all seen the horrifying pictures, and I've also met victims of Kfar Aza. It's very, very, very traumatic. People were murdered in absolute cold blood, and I think the whole country is in a terrible sense of trauma. And I agree that Israel has got the right to defend itself. And the problem with Hamas is it's not just Hamas, the terrorists, the genocidal terrorists that want to destroy Israel. They are also funded and trained by Iran. It's part of a much bigger conflict. But there has to be someone somewhere who can try and mediate. We all agree, I think, that there needs to be pauses, humanitarian pauses, so that medicine and aid can come into Gaza. But there has to be an end plan. So I did go to Qatar with Ronald Lauder, who's the president of the World Jewish Congress, with a couple of others. I can't say who we met, but we spent 2 very, very full days speaking. And I think that Qatar is critical to trying to be a mediator with Hamas. And I really hope that the tensions can be de-escalated and that the hostages can be released. And the international community then has to have responsibility for making sure that there is a 2-state solution and that the international community is committed to that there is an economic recovery plan for Gaza, and that Israel has safe and secure borders so that this can never happen again. Stories of beheadings, I've read tonight, babies cooked in ovens. It can't get any worse than that. It's a trauma that will never leave the country, but we have to find a way forward and to de-escalate the tensions. And it's not just for Israel's benefit, it's the whole region and the world. Iran is a threat and a menace to all of us.
Woman there in red.
I reject your narrative that Hamas is killing innocent Palestinian civilians, including, till this date, 2,000 babies and children. Innocent. It is not Hamas that's killing them. It is one person, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his apartheid state of Israel. Can I also... I want to ask the entire panel a question.
Hang on, just 1 minute. When you say Hamas are not killing anybody,
I am talking
Because clearly,
about...
in Israel, they most definitely did.
The question...
And that also included babies.
I agree, and I condemn the atrocities of the terrorist Hamas. But the question was referring to innocent Palestinian civilians that are forgotten. They're forgotten on most media stations. They are not the top story. Till now, 9,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed.
OK, I would just
Who
say...
is their voice?
I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm just saying the BBC absolutely has reported it as a top story for many, many nights. I'm not sure what outlets you're referring to, but I could certainly... for BBC News, we most certainly have. Marie, I'll let you come back in, but I'll just hear a bit more from you as well. But thank you for your point. The man behind with the poppy on.
Do we supply arms to Israel?
Jeremy?
There are... the UK government won't. There will be companies inside the UK...
There are British companies that do, I think.
That will, under licence, and we have very strict arms export regimes to make certain that they are that they have to go through a process. But there are UK companies that will sell arms to Israel within that regime. Yes.
OK. The man just in front of you. Yes.
I'd like to know how many Palestinians need to be killed before it's justified. You know, to justify the number of people that are being killed in the kibbutz. And the other point I would like to make, there is a constant talk about we're going to clear the Hamas out of the country and clear them all together. Isn't this a little bit like the final solution?
Well, that's quite a thing to say. Marie, I tell you, I will come back to you, but...
I'm happy to. Don't worry, I'm happy. It's up to you.
OK, up to you then. Go on.
Absolutely not. Hamas are terrorists. Hamas are like ISIS. And I'm sure in this country, in Israel is a country the size of Wales, if 1,400 people were brutally murdered and beheaded, I'm sure that you would want to know that action's going to be taken. At the time, Israel was not at war with Hamas, and Israel isn't at war with the people of Gaza or the Palestinians. It is Hamas. And I went down to meet victims last week that had families that had been murdered and taken as hostage in Kibbutz Aza. These people were their friends. They were peace activists. They loved a lot of these people. One of them spent a lot of time taking Palestinian children to hospitals. They were totally shocked. They were absolutely brutally murdered. Israel is not an apartheid state. All its citizens, whether they're Arab citizens or Israeli citizens, all have equal rights under Israeli law. And if anybody in the Middle East wanted to, for example, to be gay, that would be the country to be in. You might laugh, but Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East.
Democracy.
OK, hang on. Let me get the rest of the panel in. So, Nick, is it time for the government opposition to call for a full ceasefire? If not, why not? Now, obviously, there are people within your party, many people within your party, who feel that it is time to call for a ceasefire. But that is not Keir Starmer's position.
Well, firstly, look, the scenes we are seeing every day are absolutely harrowing. And we all want to see, as soon as possible, an end to the fighting. We need to see the peace process really restarted properly so that we have a safe and secure Israel next to a viable Palestinian state. But no, I don't believe that now is the moment to call for a ceasefire, because to do that would be to leave Hamas with the capability to carry out another terrorist atrocity as they did on the 7th of October. And indeed, Hamas have been saying that only in recent days. And it would be to leave those hostages that Hamas took where they currently are. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be calling for humanitarian pauses. We shouldn't be doing more to deal with this catastrophic humanitarian situation that we find in Gaza. We've seen now some opening of the Rafah crossing. I actually think we need the Disasters Emergency Committee to be utilised, working with the government for a huge raising of money, which the government could then match. That's what's happened before in the case of Ukraine. It's happened in the case of Afghanistan.
Why are you not managing to convince your own shadow ministers about this, then?
I think people...
you've got councillors who've resigned. More than 60 Labour MPs have called for a ceasefire.
Listen, I've spoken in recent weeks, not just to parliamentary colleagues, but party members, party supporters. I know someone who visited a kibbutz only weeks before it was targeted by Hamas on the 7th of October. Many of the people that she spoke to ended up being killed. I know people with relatives in Gaza who are extraordinarily worried. So I totally understand why people who have this deeply personal link feel the way they do. But that's why Keir Starmer has been listening to all the different views that are put, but he's also been very firm in the judgments that he's making as well. I think that's so important.
Mustafa.
October the 7th was horrific and barbaric and unbelievably painful to watch. And the last 3 weeks or so, I'm now seeing babies being pulled out of the rubble and children who have lost their parents. And it's exhausting. I mean, this has to be enough. It's definitely time for a ceasefire, whether we call it a humanitarian pause or an aid pause. My humanity won't let me watch this any longer. It's sickening.
Do you think Hamas would agree to a ceasefire? I mean, Hamas, I think he might have been the political leader of Hamas, who was on doing an interview only in the last couple of days and said, we must remove Israel, the Al-Aqsa flood, meaning the 7th of October. That's just the first time. There'll be a second time, a third time, a fourth time. It doesn't sound like they're in the mood for a ceasefire.
I agree with Marie's comments. I mean, it's time for de-escalation. How do you do de-escalation? Someone has to start. Someone has to take the first step. Otherwise, we're just going to be led by rage and anger, and who knows how that might affect the rest of the Middle East. Now's the time to stop.
OK. The woman here in the front.
Are the UK government, or what are the UK government doing to release the hostages?
All right, I'll come back to that, Jeremy. And, yes, the man in the striped sweater there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said Israel has a right to self-defence. That does not mean killing children every single day. And I also want to say, Israel is the biggest recruiter of Hamas. What you're doing today, you're creating more and more people who are going to be wanting to do more damage in the future.
Camilla.
So that is one of the risks, isn't it? That's what happened in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and the terrible risk, as you say, for Israel is that the more civilian casualties are caused in Palestine, the more recruits there will be to Hamas. And I agree that makes this even more difficult. Personally, though, I still find it really difficult to argue for a ceasefire. And I'll explain why I think that. I think the only way to actually get peace in this situation is to have a change of regimes in two places. To see a properly moderate democratic government in Palestine that actually represents the Palestinian people in Gaza, and see an end to Benjamin Netanyahu. I think we are about to see the end to Benjamin Netanyahu because he has not delivered the one thing he promised the Israeli people, which was security. He has done a number of other things which many, many Jews I know totally disagree with, and many Israelis totally disagree with, and it's time for him to go. But at the moment, if you call for a ceasefire, you are leaving the hostages on the other side of the wall, and you are unable to negotiate because the people on the other side are terrorists who have never wanted peace in the 16 years that they have been oppressing the people of Gaza. So that is my problem. And I mean, Mustafa, I agree, you know, it's kind of a question, what is the difference between a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire? Well, I think Israel has to try and minimise the casualties as far as humanly possible, and it's not at all clear whether it's doing that. It has to let more aid in. But I equally don't see how we, from a very, very long way away, can tell it as a sovereign democracy not to try and get its people back and just to leave everything frozen.
Steve, where are you? I want to come back to you. What do you think about... You asked this question. What do you think about what you've heard?
Yeah, I think obviously the essence of the question sort of got lost with, I think, this very emotive subject. But I think really the essence of the question is there are a lot of innocent people dying. There's obviously grandmothers been taken hostage on one side. There's children dying on the other side. And it's more what can we do to stop this from happening? I feel it's not about necessarily having to take a side. It's about, as humanity, it's pretty disgusting what's going on, the whole of it, and what can we actually do to do something about that? So Yeah, it's very emotive, but I think, you know, it's a struggle where you somehow got to take the emotion out of it and think, how can we solve this situation so no more civilian people die? Because it's just tragic watching every day. It's really, really upsetting.
It certainly is. Marie, there are a number of questions directed to you, so I just want you to have the final word.
These hostages have to be released. There are 30 children also that have been taken hostage. One is a baby of a few months old. That is absolutely key, I think, to de-escalation. And I'm afraid it's not as simple to say, why is the fighting carrying on? Hamas is a genocidal regime that wants to wipe Israel off the map, wants it to be annihilated. And if Israel doesn't deal with Hamas now, they will simply rearm and it will be worse for the future.
You must worry that something like Hamas will be spawned from what's happened in Gaza in the future.
No, absolutely. That's why I think that if the hostages are released, there can be some de-escalation. The international community has to get the two-state solution back on the table. They have to be behind it. They have to have a plan to give economic aid to Gaza for recovery and to enable Israel to have safe and secure borders. It can't just be left to chance. And I think the world should call on Hamas to release those hostages now. It's not a situation that can continue while those hostages are still taken. And Hamas also puts its own people in the line of fire. They put their military operations in schools, in hospitals. They don't protect their own people. And if Hamas, ISIS were in the UK, I think you would feel exactly the same, that you would want it to be gone, because it's not a recipe for world peace. It's not just Israel. It will affect the whole region.
All right. Thank you, Marie. Let's move on. Let's take another question.